So we've seen what's been spelled out by the Auditor General's office. The government says, well, there'll be an inquiry. Fair enough?
It's not fair enough. I think the government's got some questions that it needs to answer when it comes to this. At the end of the day, we've got a Westminster system of parliamentary responsibility and ministerial responsibility. I'd want to know very clearly, what were ministers doing to allow such a blatant waste of taxpayers' money? How on earth could this have occurred? At the very least, ministers should have been asking questions about how much is this property costing us? Is it the best value for taxpayers' money? And clearly, the ministers either didn't do that, couldn't be bothered to do that, or decided not to do that.
But don't you find out those very things in an inquiry? What's the alternative?
Well, this is the government inquiring into itself. I think that really there needs to be much more scrutiny from the Parliament in relation to this matter. And obviously we've now had the Audit Office report come out. The Audit Office report, says some pretty damning things about the way in which this process was handled. But frankly, I find it extraordinary if you've got a $30 million land acquisition that no ministers knew anything about it or knew anything about how this process was undertaken. And I think the government needs to answer some questions into relation to that. The government's trying to run a million miles from this. They're saying it was all an administrative process, all well away from us, all hands off, and it's really the department. We're inquiring into the department. Frankly, that's not good enough. Ministers are responsible for the decisions that they make. They're responsible for the proper use of taxpayers' money. And I think they've got some really serious questions to answer in relation to this acquisition.
So will Labor set to seek something up in the Senate to probe this?
Look, we'll certainly use what avenues we've got available to us in the Parliament to do so. But, obviously I'm not going to disclose what they are here, but we'll certainly use the Parliament to put some scrutiny on this acquisition. But I think it would be much better if the government actually just came clean about what actually happened. How did they get this so absolutely and comprehensively wrong? At the worst, it's incompetence. The best, it's incompetence. At the worst, is it something else?
Right, but again, how else did they do that? I mean, are you asking for a long news conference complete with mea culpa? There is going to be an inquiry. What are you saying should happen instead specifically?
Well, at this stage, we don't know if there's an inquiry. The government has said that the department is undertaking some inquiries about internally its processes and what happened there. Ministers do need to front press conferences. They do need to be upfront and be out saying, this is what happened, this is what I knew. Obviously, we'd rather not have to go through freedom of information processes, but if that's what the government's going to force us to do, we'll certainly do that. I find it extraordinary that you could have, Scott Morrison as Treasurer, Paul Fletcher, both members from Sydney, that they didn't have some knowledge about what was happening with the acquisition of this land and making, and the fact that they didn't seem to be making any inquiries into how was this process actually undertaken and what the basic value of this land is, I think is really quite extraordinary.